Thank you for sharing, everybody. Um, okay, a lot of different links coming in. Thank you so much. Before we enter into the launch, and first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We'll start off with a quick introduction of all the panelists here. Thank you for joining us, and then we'll move on to the panel, and then we will introduce you to the new members of the communities of practice, which is I'm very excited to do that. Okay, so before we move into anything else, and I will be introducing Sheepals, what is this new term that we've come up with, what is this communities of practice, I'll be talking all about it. But first, there is this new sort of like culture we have developed within the community that every space that we get into, whether it's an internal space or like an external space, we always start with poetry and we start with feminist poetry. So I will be sort of like putting up two of my favorite poetries here. Anybody from the panelists or attendees can, just unmute and read it out loud if they want. Come on, guys. I don't want to tag. Anybody who would like to read this poetry for us?
I can volunteer.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Sure. So, won't you celebrate with me? The title of the poem. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and women. What they see to be except myself. I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone. One more before we move on to the agenda and everything else. Who said it was simple by Audrey Lorde. And since we're talking about intersectionality, I really want to make this more space.
Okay, I can go ahead. I know how awkward these silences are, and I've done enough sessions to know them. Who said it was simple by Audre Lorde? There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Netflix, the women rally before they march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes, a waiting brother to serve them first. And the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading that. With that, just a quick introduction of the space and the agenda. Just checking first, this panel and the space mostly, I thought it would be in English, but is there anybody who is more comfortable with Hindi? If everybody is comfortable with English, can you give me a thumbs up so we can continue with that language? Okay, cool, amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. If at any point of time you want a mix of Hindi and English, we definitely have to do that as well. Great. So a little bit about Shreepals. The idea of Shreepals came into consideration for me was when I started creating a curriculum for girls. And this was under an initiative for global shapers community. And I realized there are multiple issues, right, that come up when you're dealing with gender equality. There's menstruation, there's sanitation, which is so interconnected with education. But at the same time, there's financial literacy. There is leadership. There are different issues that come up when we are talking about empowering. Oh, yes, I will do that. Thank you. Thank you, Parashni. I hope this is better. And I saw there are multiple issues that are out there, and there needs to be a space where we can talk about how these issues play with each other and how those dynamics play out. And that is when I started thinking about a community of practice, a community of people who are passionate about gender equality and gender justice. And I envisioned it as a space where knowledge, skills, and unique perspectives sort of like come together to explore the challenges faced by young girls, and how can we then create a repository of valuable information and insights. The goal of this space is not just to talk about change or talk about things theoretically, but also being a catalyst for it. And behind this initiative and behind this community is an understanding that there's an absence of in-depth data that particularly impacts marginalized communities in classrooms, where challenges are often more pronounced. Um, Again, now talking about why is our first session about um, the crucial link of intersectionality and gender equality. Gender equality has emerged as a pivotal goal, seeking to dismantle systemic barriers and foster inclusivity. However, something that has also come up a lot internally within our community is that a nuanced and comprehensive approach to achieving gender equality requires an understanding and integration of intersectionality. And the concept of intersectionality, which was introduced by Crenshaw, and something we actually discussed in one of our internal COP town halls too, was emphasizes the interconnected nature of multiple categories like gender, race, class, and so much more. And so with that idea, I brought together this panel of women I really admire personally as well, and who come with such diverse experience. And the objective of this panel is threefold. One, as a community, as people who've come together on a Saturday to discuss what gender equality means to us and what intersectionality for gender equality means to us. What are some challenges in achieving that, and what are some best practices that we have witnessed that effectively addressed intersectionality? And with that, I will introduce our four panelists today. Just quickly sharing my screen. Right. So one of our panelists is Deepali Vandana, who is the co-founder of Urja Trust, and she has 20 plus experience in the development sector. Um, she has influenced policy change and by becoming a part of various networks, government committees, and amplifying structural challenges. She herself hails from marginalized community and facing both gender and caste-based discrimination firsthand. She has a lived experience. Believing in the inner strength of individuals, she has walked along the transformative journeys of thousands of youth and women violence survivors. Among her many accomplishments are her bachelor's in psychology and economics. She has an MA in economics, MBA in HR, and a diploma in public policy. Following her passion, she is an emerging woman farmer, entrepreneur, and environmentalist. Thank you, Dipali, for joining us today. Uh, Payoshni is the co-founder and CEO of Sama, an early-stage technology startup which aims at advancing gender equity at the workplace. She comes with 17 years of experience in partnerships, people, and programs across the corporate and development sector. She's passionate about conversations around women in the workforce and a strong advocate of inclusive and diverse workplaces. She's an avid reader, lives in Bangalore with her partner, her daughter, and three dogs. Welcome to the space, Vaishni. Thanks for joining us. Anupama Kashyap is a manager at ACT Grants, driving work to increase women's workplace participation and equity. Having worked across the themes of education, health, and philanthropy, her latest stint involves building a multi-stakeholder consortium to advance women into roles of leadership and influence. In her current role, Anupama looks at investing in sustainable gender transformative solutions in the Indian startup ecosystem. Welcome, Anupama. And then Shruti. has worked in different capacities in the sector. She's currently with TASRA's catalytic philanthropy team and provides strategic advisory support to CSO partners and donors. She's worked with the Asia Foundation and worked on multi-sectoral projects, both regionally and India. As a practitioner, her interest lies in bringing a gender and inclusion lens to all programming, whether it's about building safe cities, improving cross-border trade, improving quality of education, or thinking of climate resilience. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. And we will start with a panel and sort of like, although I have introduced all four of you and I've talked about a little bit about your professional journey, how I would like to start this space is if you could talk a little bit about like a brief overview of your journey, specifically in the field of gender equality and gender justice, and what motivates you to come to this panel today. I would invite Payushni to share first, and Payushni, you can invite others along the way.
Got it. Soumya, thanks so much for having me. And I mean, now it puts pressure on me on whatever I say. I guess others will follow the suit as it typically happens, but happy to get started. I mean, you have read about my professional journey, so I'm not going to deep dive on it. But, maybe just like go 2-3 years back where, after about 18 years of work experience, I found myself in early 22 in the startup ecosystem. And I think two realizations I had. One was just the lack of women in the workplace, right? And at entry level, you see this. But for example, the startup where I was working, I was the only woman leader in 22 plus director and level above people. So just a quick whip around and you realize that there are no other women in the table. So that was one. And second was, I think through a lot of my experiences across a few organizations, I've realized that unfortunately, a lot of Indian workplaces seem to be designed to exclude women. And, it still continues to be very much a old boys club. Maybe the boys now have been replaced by like tech bros, especially in Bangalore context, but it's still the same, right? It's still old boys tech bro club that, dominates the narrative. And even in the most high intention organizations, like organizations that come with great culture and intention, things like motherhood penalty are very, very real. So I think some of these experiences that I have had in my career, I've observed my friends go through, combined with a whole body of literature that came in 22, which spoke about the dire statistics on India, on women labor force participation in India, that really, pushed me thinking about gender as like a field where I want to maybe definitely, dedicate the next decade of my life. And that's how I started Sama with my co-founder Mridvika. And I think the driving force behind, and I'm just 1 year into this journey, so I wouldn't say that my understanding of the space is probably like, not maybe as nuanced as somebody like Dipali who's been working in the space for a really long time. But I would say that we are really trying to double down on the problem that a urban working woman faces. And we are realizing just the leaky bucket problem that India has, right? Like when you look at the number of college graduates that come out of India, women account for 50% of it. 32% enter workforce, only 12% reach middle management, less than 1% become executive positions. And that's the leaky bucket that we need to fix. So my work with Sama is, just focusing on retention, strengthening the system for women to really survive and thrive and build long careers. So that's a little bit like my understanding and my experience in the field so far. What motivated me to come here? I mean, I'm always happy to come back to any Teach for India community. I feel like the community has given me a lot and it's just my way of giving it back. And any conversation around gender is something where I feel like we need more voices to talk about the struggles of urban Indian women as well. Thanks. Can I invite Anupama, since I know her, to share?
Sure. No, I think I'm quite excited to be on this panel, right? I was just thinking while, going through some of the questions we were asked to speak about, and especially when it comes to why gender for me, neither do I have the academic background. I did my engineering. And neither do I have a lot of deep experience like my co-panelists on this. It really happened by chance that I was put on a project that was looking at what is the status of mid-management women in India. And my first glance was, especially like in the urban setting, even Payushni was talking about, right? Um, Before that, having worked like across spaces like education and health, I'd seen some of the problems which also like most of us are very aware about. And here I wasn't really able to pinpoint, but once I started understanding the space, it almost became like a lived reality for me, right? I'm like, these are what like probably someone in any mid-management position will face. And the the thing here is also the fact that once you get into looking at gender, you'll see that it's so cross-sectional across all the themes like one has worked with. And that's what stuck with me, and the fact that it's almost like so personal and like a lived reality for so many people on the table. And when you look at intersectionalities of people coming from different communities, caste, sexual orientation, it adds a whole new layer. And the system just doesn't exist where you can actually cater solutions to different groups of people for different kinds of challenges they face, because it's not built that way so far. And relooking at it means relooking and challenging at our notions of probably what like a successful organization or a community or a program looks like. And that like is almost like redoing years of work. So I guess these are really interesting and broad questions which sort of caught my interest and I wanted to work on, and that's sort of how I landed here. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna hand over to the Pali, because I'm really excited to also hear what she has to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Anupama. So first of all, thank you, Soumya, creating this platform. It's very much important to me. It means that the marginalized women is getting to opportunity to share what's there's a journey to reach out to these kind of the platforms. So for me, I'm sure when you see me on a screen after 20 years plus experience, it's not mean I'm having the gray hair. So that's the reason I would like to share here. I started my journey at the age of the 16, and it's a start from my survival modes. So there is one of the organization next to my house, and they're working with the street children. I started to join with them, and because that time for me is getting very hard to get my education to complete. So मैं वहाँ पे बच्चों को सिखाने जाती थी, and from that my journey started. Almost 12 years I work with another organization as a social work, and there is some other project related to work. After that, that's a 10-year before I started these organizations, and that's a very strong motivation because more than the 15 years I saw there's who are the marginal, who are the management on the most of the non-profit organization, who are the leading organization, where is the marginalized women getting the opportunity to see themselves at the management levels. And that's somewhere I found ki it's a very much important the women, those are coming from the marginalized, even we are talking about the gender justice, is it that's a social justice is taking care of the same way. तो वो एक बहुत important aspects रहा था मेरे लिए कि the first hand experience of the caste and the gender based discrimination and violence, because I saw that's a 1993 communal rights. I saw that's the other communal rights in a country, and that's very much impacted to me. I got opportunity to see the rural and the urban life, and when I saw that the rural and urban life together, so what's the form of the discrimination happen in the context of the caste-based violence? So that's very much motivated to me, take it to this kind of the leadership. So that's the one thing. What is motivated to me here to part of this panel? Uh, I'm sure you all are aware about that. Some marginalized leaders, women somewhere having that kind of the barriers of language, and sometimes they felt ki because of the language they couldn't reach out these kind of the positions, and they couldn't contribute into this kind of the conversations when having a people talking about the equity, and the justice. So I'm sure when I'm here, there's a most of that people, those who are watching me and hearing me, we can break these kind of the barriers, and we can take the larger community to part these kind of the conversations. So I'm passing out to Shruti.
Yeah, very difficult job you've made for me, Dipali. I'm terrified of going after you, but I'll be very brief. And Soumya, thank you so much for having me as part of this discussion. I'm basically a generalist who's kind of steeped in gender equality work. And my journey into gender equality started from theory. I'm a very nerdy child who found a lot of my lived reality kind of speak with feminist literature. And then that kind of guided me into the space of development sector. It's a very linear trajectory for me where I read about something and I found my calling there. And my work has been around different, it's a short career so far, but it's been around education, it's been around working with women and improving their livelihood, um, working very much with regional and national projects, and finding spaces to push back from tech bros. Especially tech bros telling me stuff like digital ho gaya, to there is what is gender. There's no gender digital divide. So like really finding spaces and putting your point across that no, gender needs to be at the forefront of conversations. It needs to be baked into program design. So just using my positioning as as a program designer, make sure that gender equality is baked into whatever we're doing, that we're collecting data that speaks to the evidence building, um, and really serving for the use case, right? So it's kind of going beyond just counting women and making sure women are on panels, but kind of really looking at what are the cross-cutting challenges that women and folks who don't fit into policy-defined binaries work with. So that is my journey, and that's where I think I will be for some time now. But very difficult job. I hope I was able to add something to it. But Soumya, I'll pass back to you.
That's great.
We can't hear you very well if you don't hold your mic up.
Yes. Sorry about all the technical issues. Anyway, but I loved hearing from all of you, especially what you shared, Shruti, a lot of times. I also feel like there are things that some people might feel are not required or are not connected, but evidence or data-based evidence is like a light, right? Once we shed light on it, people are able to see it much more clearly. And that was also the idea of this community. A lot of you actually talked about this a little bit, but the next question I want to go into is, what does intersectionality mean to you? And how is it connected to your journey? So how you define intersectionality and why do you think it's so crucial? I really want to hand over this question first to Dipali ma'am, because she started off talking very beautifully about, how language is sometimes a barrier and how the challenges faced by people in urban areas and rural areas are so different. So yeah, we would love to hear from you first, Dipali ma'am, and then you can invite the next person.
So Soumya, first of all, request to you, please call me Dipali because it's sounding very hard to me to take it this. And that's also the hierarchy somewhere. We need to look at that way also. So for me, when I'm looking the intersectionality, is almost that analytical lens, what I used to use into my work, the gender, caste, and the mental health. That's very much because I feel ki caste is a very much at a priority level for me, because the other lens of that intersectionality, if I think ki, that can be the change, that can be possible to work. But in the Indian context, to work on the caste system, it's going very hard, and that's going hard to change because it's not easily to accept it by the community. Even we're talking about the community participation, but it's not easily accepted by the community to work on these kind of the intersectionality brackets like the caste. And why I'm saying the caste, because those are the marginalized women, those who are belonging from this caste and this community. They are actually interconnecting with the other intersectionality domains, like that's the educations, even that's having that's a severe mental health issues. There is a disabilities issue, there's a class issues, there is a other kind of the issues. And that's kind of the me is a very much important to look at that intersectionality to lens of the caste. क्योंकि जब तक हम वो नहीं देखेंगे, it will be the very hard to we can say कि we are taking care of that intersectionality to lens of the justice, वो बहुत मुझे लग रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है. For examples, I would like to give it to here कि जब मैं गांव में देखती हूँ, because I saw that community what when living in a rural atmosphere, ज्यादातर जब हमारे जैसे संस्थाएं when reaching out to communities and when they're doing their project, if we can look at which women coming and participating into that project, अगर हम गांव के structures को देखने की कोशिश करेंगे, then there's a most of the marginalized community living end of the villages part of that villages. तो इतने corners पे रहते, there is no services reaching out to them, and even they're walking across that village, they're having the lots of fear. Is it they're doing anything is wrong, because there's the other consequences will be they getting after that there any mistake. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर एक औरत मार्जिनलाइज वुमेन्स अगर एक गांव के रास्ते से चल रही, शी ऑलवेज हैविंग दैट अ कॉन्शियसनेस कि उसके चलते वक्त इफ शी इज गेटिंग समथिंग टू डू रॉन्ग, वो कुछ ऐसी चीजें करे जिससे दैट इज अपर क्लास अपर प्रिविलेज कम्युनिटी विल बी द थ्रेटनिंग टू हर. एंड इट्स नॉट अबाउट द मेन, it's about the women also. That's a privileged communities women will be also possibility to shout it to her कि आप ऐसे कैसे चल रहे, आप यहाँ से नहीं जा सकते. So that's kind of the emotional stress she is always taking and carrying even to regular daily life when she is living into that villages. जब हम इस तरीके के प्रोग्राम जब कम्युनिटीज में मैं देख रही थी, ऐसे there's a marginalized women couldn't participate into that program. Even that program we're talking about the development, even the program we're talking about the community participation, but that women keeping themselves very far away because that's the issue of the touchability. There's a issue of that how you can sit together into that group discussion, and उन सारी चीजों में they are living very far. They're not getting education, because to get education, even we are talking about country is a more the digital world, but the reality that a marginalized women and marginalized girls is not getting education. That's a hardly completing the 5th standard and 7th standard. Now we all are aware about that's what the scene of the scholarship. Even that's a beti padhao, beti badhao kind of the slogan, but the reality that a marginalized women is not getting an education. And how we are connecting with that things with the social justice, because that's a community not getting a resources. If community not getting resources, if that resources is very scarce, then within a community that resources not going to the women, because always there's a patriarchal, because marginalized community also have a very strong patriarchal system. So within that community, whatever the resources reaching out to them, that resources first goes to the men within that community. And again, there's the women is not getting that resources, where she's again the step back. So that's a lots of things I felt ki, the caste is a very much important. Even the women are having the education, even women are having the money, but still even the urban setting, you can't get that much acceptable. For example, again, I would like to share about me. I have an education, I have money where I can afford a house. But in the city, when I'm going and asking a house, people are asking what community I'm belonging. So on that base, I'm getting a resources, even the urban setting. And this is a situation if me, where I'm aware about my entitlement and my right. What about the other marginalized women? Even they don't know about their rights and their entitlement, how to assert. So it's a very much difficult to, even that knowledge you have, even you have education, you have a money, you have a support, but the larger community acceptance is very much important. And when I'm saying the acceptance, it means I'm talking about the reformative ideology. I hope it's almost give a understanding about the things.
Thanks, Deepali. You're right. Right, the next person to share. So you can invite the next person to share. You're on mute, Deepali.
Anupama can probably more put highlights on it.
Sure, thank you, Deepali. I mean, there was one quote, right? Like I think this was in one of Melinda Gates' speech on why investing in gender is so important. It goes something like, the power of men is so the power of like the face of power is so often men, and face of struggle is always the women, and until the face of power changes, the face of struggle doesn't really change. And I used to think about this a lot, because even when you think of power, okay, you think of like a cis het man, probably like in a suit in a big building. And probably now the definition is also changing to include women from, you know, typically maybe like from privileged backgrounds. But what really also matters is, how do you, like when you think of probably a struggling woman, you think of someone, who is it that you think of, and how do you make sure that that person is also gets the kind of influence and role in decision making to reach that place where, you know, like they also have the power to then change their surroundings and community. I think that's what like it sort of for me also boils down to. And this comes a lot like when we think of like program designing, like Shruti was talking about earlier, right? Any program or policy or even a solution that you're designing for, historically it gets designed for the majority, which is in the middle of the population, because it's easier to like also launch something, test, reiterate, and like the extents of the curve usually left behind. So how do we relook at designing something which is across the spectrum in a more sustainable and scalable way, is like also like just like food for thought. And how do you start intentionally doing that across, right? I guess that is what becomes like really important when we are looking at things. And in that, of course, there will be many iterations. You look at intersectionality also in a way where first you solve for the main problem statement, and then how do you tweak that where you can cater to different sets of population. And I guess that's what is important. And second, I definitely feel like we need to move away from the narrative of all of this work being there for, like for the business world, uh, for lack of a better word, all of this being sort of a charity case. More than that, it needs to be, this is not just like good business strategies to have, but this is actually smart things to do, because what is good for your organization is also what is good for someone having a diverse team, right? Everything goes hand in hand, and it doesn't have to be either or. And I guess establishing that sort of case across where there's a lot of power, unfortunately, right now, so that it trickles down through the pipeline, I guess, is something to like think of and important. I'm just gonna end there and probably hand over to Shruti.
I think you got a glimpse of my talking notes on Anupama, because I was just going to say a lot of what you already said. But I think in terms of the placement of when is it a good time to take an intersectional lens, right? And I think that's where a lot of the stumbling happens, is that people think that there's going to be one kind of program that's going to solve for intersectionality, instead of saying that all programs need to move from a gender neutral to a gender transformative space. And I think that that journey is what is most important. And and the sector is also a little bit guilty of doing this. So I'm going to give you a very broad example without naming names, is that we were looking at building safer cities for women. And there was a conversation that somebody put in front, saying that why are you only looking at cis women? Can we look at trans women? And it was the most logical thing to do, right? And like Anupama said, it makes business sense. You kind of solve for the most vulnerable. It is going to help hopefully solve for other use cases as well. And there was so much pushback. It was saying that no, you're taking resources from women. Let's solve for women first, and then we'll come to other groups, which logically doesn't make sense. But I think the sector is kind of guilty of doing that as well, to kind of say that we'll incrementally solve for things instead of saying who is the worst affected, who is suffering from these compounding effects of vulnerabilities. And which is why I think it's important for intersectionality to be contextualized, because if you look at the debates that people have had about how intersectionality is an imperial concept, to kind of moving to saying no, we need to look at X, Y, and Z. I think there's some reflection needed on what intersectionality means in a particular context, and who is it that you're trying to solve for. And I'll stop there because I know Pashini will definitely have more things to add here. So I'll pass to you.
Thanks, Shruti. I'm wondering if I have more things to add. I think one, I mean, I want to take a step back and take a slightly cynical view here. And this is to what you and Anupama were saying. And I was smiling because I'm doing this job, right? Like I'm trying to sell to corporates saying, why is it important to have diversity? And I cannot tell you how difficult it is to make a business case for women in the workforce. And I just want to table it out there that, though we may come from a very high intention lens, unfortunately, the reality is that, again, going back to, old boys club, they don't really care that much, right? So, but I'll stop my cynicism there to like look at some other points that both of you raised. And Dipali, of course, I mean, your experience seems so much more deeper here. I think just in the context of like, when I look at women in the workforce, and that's where my purview lies. So I'm just going to zoom in there is, I think two parts. Number one, for me, intersectionality is to understand who's the more marginalized amongst the marginalized. So women in the workforce are a minority, and within that, there are groups that are more minority than there. The upper class, upper caste privilege is absolutely real in the workforce, the kind of opportunities that women from upper class, and I'm sure if we like really look around us, we'll see a lot of examples of this, especially in this group. So, the upper class, upper caste privilege is very, very real, and it stays true in corporate India. I think the only thing which I wanted to share was that when we are designing policies or programs in corporate India for urban Indian women, where intersectionality really plays an important role is for us to understand that women experience and the challenges that they experience in the workplace are not only led by their gender, but also, by other intersecting factors such as caste, class, religion is a big one, ethnicity, the backgrounds that you come from is a big one. And to understand that these intersecting identities actually create very unique barriers and opportunities for women. So even at a corporate level, when I'm designing a DEI policy, kind of, Shruti, I think what you said, that one option is to take like the most marginalized view and design it. We are long, long way away from that. But I'm saying we need to understand that a policy on gender will not help everybody. So it will have to go deeper across caste, class, religion, all of that. And with that, I'll pause.
I really thought after this question, I will summarize it in a one or two sentences and bring on to the next question. But I'm learning so many things that that's not
We
possible.
can't hear you very well. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We don't want to
I'm
miss what you're
sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll remember to do this. So, I was just saying, I had really thought I will summarize everything that, is coming out and so much that I'm learning, but it is going to take me time as well to summarize it because a lot of different things are coming out, right? One, how can we, should we start with intersectionality or move incrementally as we're doing now, or how, Dipali was sharing that it's not possible to talk about gender justice without caste, especially in rural areas, right? A lot of different themes emerging. And with that, and a lot of this we have already shared, but I do want to now want us to touch upon a little bit about the challenges, challenges and barriers that come up when we're trying to achieve gender equality and gender justice in while considering intersectionality. And if maybe we can talk about your experiences of coming across such challenges. I would like to invite Shruti first.
Thanks, Samya. I'll keep this very brief, but I think the biggest challenge that I want to pinpoint is the disconnect between the people who are making the policy decisions and the people for whom they are making the policy decisions. And the lack of making that tragedy, making that effort to understand who you're making the policies for. It's a very, let's make a policy, we'll build and people will come kind of a mentality right now. And I think that is the biggest challenge when we're trying to achieve gender equality. There was this viral meme about the Indian Railways put apparently a baby seat for the mother on the right-hand side. And all mothers were like, you should have just asked us. We're never going to put our baby on the right-hand side where the baby will fall. We're going to put them inside, simple things like that, because you're not centering the voices of the people you want to solve for. And then linked to this, I think the other point is that there just isn't enough data and enough evidence that people can tap into, and make a case for, let's say, centering women. So there is a paucity of data that can just speak to the problems and establish the centrality of the problems. And I know Ayashini definitely has things to say about data and women, so I'll pass to you.
Thanks, Shruti. I mean, for this question, though, I'll keep it brief and definitely, I mean, data is a big lacuna, right? When we talk about women in the workforce, honestly, and that's the gap that needs to be filled first. I think corporate India, again, right? I feel like intersectionality is so far away. We are from that conversation. At a corporate level, we are still struggling to come to like a basic gender representation, gender equality. Gender equity is, another step removed. So I feel like, and it's this just like my limited experience of like 1 year being in this field, is that right now in corporate India, we are not really thinking of intersectionality. We are looking at gender in a very linear fashion, and that's okay because that's a bigger issue right now. I would like to give you an example of how though this challenge manifests. And this was, we were having a conversation with a professor from LSE who's actually doing this work in corporate India, where she's trying to document how women from different caste or religions get treated in corporate India. And I can't remember the exact scope of a study, but one example that she gave was that so often Muslim women are actually like at the receiving end of so much stereotyping and discrimination based on stereotyping in that corporate India. For example, assuming that women will not want to travel or will not want to take certain promotions because it requires longer, which just stems from, I think, their understanding of what the religion is, etc. So those conversations, though, are so far and few between right now that that's a long mile to go. Having said that, Shruti, I think one thing I would definitely agree is that the only thing that's going to fix this in the corporate India context is definitely looking at this from a more data lens. Unfortunately, all conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion in corporate India are all very anecdotal in nature. CHROs, DEI heads feel that this may not be wrong, rather than really collecting evidence of where or what is missing. And some of my organization, this is not a pitch, but that's the exact gap that we are trying to fill on. How do we just make this space much more data driven, Shruti, as kind of you said, and bridge the gap between who's making these programs and policies and for whom. Yeah, with that, Dipali, would you like to share next?
Yeah, definitely, because last 4-5 years working with very closely government on the public policies and the things. I completely agree with the Shruti, what she said, if you're developing and creating policy for them, it's important to take it their views and their opinion into that. And that's somewhere the missing when we are seeing that's the government, when they're creating policy and introducing that policy with the communities and the state. There's a completely absence of the opinion of that people, those who are developing that policies. For example, we have a Mission Shakti. That's a 2022, the government launched a Mission Shakti. And that's a period of that Mission Shakti is a 2022 to 2026. Now we are in a 2024, but still that's a umbrella scheme is not completely aware by the, even that a non-profit organization, those who are talking about the women empowerment and the women rights, they are also not aware about what's this scheme is talking about, what's a gap, what's exactly implementing, and where is the execution's gap. And here we're talking about that we don't have a data, but when I see that the government portals and the thing, there's a lots of data, but people not having that willingness to take it that a data very serious note and to analysis to that data and to try to figure out, okay, why that a number of women taking a safe spaces support. So it means the domestic violence is increases. So if there's a domestic violence increases, the next year the 2025, 24, no 25. 20 years completing domestic violence act, how much the frequently we are taking and reviewing our current laws and policies, and how much we are taking a participation of the people, for them these laws are more impacting. So I think that's a very much the gap in the system and even in a community. I also experience when I'm interacting with a non-profit organization, how much they are aware about these kind of the policy, and it's going very shocked to me when I'm interacting to them. they somewhere they're interacting with the some skills, but they're not looking at the larger impact of that schemes. What's exactly these schemes and want to achieve a motto, and there's a milestone. There's a very much important for that time to the implement that schemes. But what's somewhere the gaps of that schemes, and to have that kind of the dialogue with the ministries and the policy makers. This is a gap. So that's somewhere I would like to bring into here. In the context of the homeless young women, because I'm working with the marginalized community, and last 10 years when I interacting with the more homeless young women, I see there's a 90% young women coming from the marginalized background. And in our country, there is a no homeless population can keep themselves as a register they are a homeless. Women itself very far. 2011 में जो census हुआ था, उसके बाद now we are at 2024, but there is a no census. And even that a census there, that time not accounted the single women. Here we're talking about a single women because on a street we seen there's a most of the communities live as a homeless community. But the single women we cannot see as a single women living on a street. So that data is missing. If that data is somewhere, if state can start it to accumulate it, या उसको अगर वो लेना शुरू करेंगे, they can see what's the kind of the support system they're providing in a gender justice domain. Where there's a gaps in their schemes. क्योंकि अगर इतनी औरतें घरों से निकल के आ रही है and if they not access the safe spaces, or one more thing, that's the 2013 when Supreme Court when the give a directions and order to the state and the central key to form and establish the shelter home every district and every state. What's the current scenario of that shelter homes when we're talking about the safe spaces for the transgender and cis women? Even not having that safe spaces for the women, those who are leaving their houses. मुंबई जैसे शहरों में आज भी स्वादार होम नहीं है जहाँ पे हम migrants की बात कर रहे हैं. Is it we have a data? Because a few days ago when I'm having a discussions with one of the organization, those who working with the migrants community, and when I was checking with them, is it we have a data the single women migrants for the work to the cities, and they said that data is not that having that much. So we need to look at that why there's a single women migrants not registering herself. So what the education she having, what's the information she having? Also, is it that women migrants when leaving their villages, which community single women migrants living? Is it that data also we keeping? So there is a definitely there is a some level where definitely system is not system. You say yeah, the community say you're not keeping a data, and wherever the data is available, system and the community nodes are looking at the data. What the data is saying to us? Where is a gap? So I'm passing to Anupama. If you want to add anything into that.
I really don't have anything to add. I just think what everyone was saying, right? How do you design for a particular set of like community or cohort will be important, and how do you bring that in and integrate it more seamlessly will be a question, but nothing else to add.
One of our common themes was how anecdotal evidence can come under the dismissal of biases, but when we have evidence-based data, it sheds very clear light on what are the needs and what's missing from policy implementation and from organizational implementation. And we talked about how the lack of this data sometimes creates a space where the problem is not clearly understood, which is, I think, a good segue into the next section where I want to explore that have you ever experienced like a best practice or an implementation which has actually taken evidence-based understanding of intersectionality in implementations which actually solve the problem for, I wouldn't say everybody, that's very idealistic, but for people who need it the most, like we've been phrasing it so far. And would maybe love to start with Anupama, and Anupama, you can hand it over to the next person.
Right. I was just thinking about this and I was like, I don't think there will ever be like a model perfect enough where you'll see right from the design to the implementation and how the experience of the last mile person actually is to be uniform and perfect. But at least like from whatever I've tried to work on and whatever I've seen around is there is a lot of power to influence and set more mandates, which resides in any setting, right? Where people have that intention and they sit at the top. How do you like more equitably share that along with the people you are trying to work towards and bring them on the table instead of assuming this is what they want, is sort of where I would like hinge my bet at. So I'd say building that kind of agency and leadership, not just providing an opportunity and an equal playing field, that also requires a lot of work, but really going a step beyond is where I think you'll see like real change happening. But yeah, that's literally like 2 cents that I had on this. Parshni, if you'd like to add to this, I know.
My sense are even less than yours, Anupama, because I realize there really actually does not exist this in corporate India as far as I know. As I said, the conversations are very far away from intersectionality, and there are a lot of a lot of organizations that are ahead of the curve, so to say, for gender equity conversations like Ernst & Young, Accenture, the Tata Group, etc. Tend to still focus on, largely when we talk about gender, we firstly focus on women, and then sometimes the conversations around LGBTQII come up, but not a lot of otherwise intersectionality in terms of looking at backgrounds or caste, religion, etc. So there are generic programs that exist, but no, I am not aware of any programs that have really double-clicked on intersectionality and there are any models. Maybe I'm not aware of them. This is a good question for me to go back and say. However, I do have an example of one of our clients who's a leading not-for-profit, and they have actually come back to us to do a little bit more data-driven insights in the organization. So this organization is headed by a minority leader. And when they started out, I think they were much more diverse. And once they expanded, diversity got lost. So it's one of those few organizations that have actually come back to us and said that, can you do a deep dive, not just with gender, but an intersectionality of gender, religion, caste, and location? That's like their filters. But literally, that's the only example I have and haven't heard anything. But I'm going to go and look up more examples if they exist. Shruti, would you like to weigh in?
Oh, thank you. I think just a couple to share. I think as good practices, are they the best practices? We don't know, but there are some good practices. And so Dasra has this Rebuild India Fund, and Anupama, you can jump in whenever you feel like, considering you know more about it. But there is an investment committee that sits on top of it, that's hoping to bring more proximate leaders to the forefront. And I think that's a good way to make sure that you're held accountable for who you're selecting. You're making sure that your investment net is broad. And I think that's a very good practice to have, is to make sure intentionally look for proximate leaders and support their work. I think the conversation is also important in terms of looking at the North-South divide, and especially if you're, in these conversations with international NGOs, there's a lot of power dynamics between who's giving and who's receiving, and kind of the need to shake that up and say, we'll set the agenda, we know what we're doing, you don't know the solutions to everything. If you want change to happen, shift the power to us and we'll take care of it. I feel like that, I think the need to be a little bit political can't get missed when you talk about intersectionality. There is an inherent politics that needs to be at play here. So the need to localize, I think, is slowly coming to the forefront, and I think that's very important. The other really problematic thing, but that works really well, is the MEL frameworks that I think, Ashwini, you were also talking about, which is the monitoring, evaluation, learning frameworks that all grants seem to come with. And now there are recommendations saying that you have to do X, Y, and Z to make sure you get the grant the second time. Even though it's prescriptive, it kind of makes sure that you are designing and you are tracking some of these important things. And I think hopefully, instead of it becoming mandatory, it becomes something that we intentionally want to do. And then I'll just say 3 more things, but I think the DEI groups that came up starting 2020-ish, and I was part of one of them. I think at an organizational level, they've done a great job of holding up the mirror and saying, these are things which are important to us. You're not seeing this as an organization, and we as your employees want you to uphold some values. And I think those employee groups are very powerful. And all of us, I would encourage us to find spaces to be part of them, because they are effective. I know it puts the onus on us saying ki hum hi sayenge or hum hi bolenge, but you have to kind of put some things at the forefront. And you see a lot of the development sector job advertisements nowadays have started carrying out pay bans, which is something that all of us have fought for, right? Like every time somebody put up a post without a pay ban, you'll have 5 people who are dedicated saying, where's the pay ban? Why are you asking people? Are you trying to get us at a lower rate, right? And small things like that, but I think they add up. The one other program, and this is again corporate-ish, so Ashini, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are programs that are trying to bring women back to the workforce, especially, I'll just talk about the visa program that I already know, which is to bring women who have a gap in their career back to the workforce with a stipend and a training that's associated with that 6-month period, so that they can upskill, and then it's not counted as a break, but then now where are you best fitted to go into a job role? And I think that's so powerful, because you're not actually, like Anpa said at the beginning, doing charity, but you're saying, we need your skills and we're going to help you do the best at the job. So we're going to give you some additional training so that you fit the job role. And I think that's very powerful and very empowering way of looking at it. And the last thing, at the risk of being an Andolanjeevi here, but is that the protest movements are very important, right? For us to be vocal and to ask for what is due to us, because these protests have a proof of concept of saying that you will be heard if you are vocal enough, you're making a role for this, and your rights will slowly come to you. And I think there is something to be said about keeping that activist lens a little bit with you when you're doing some of this work. And then with that, Dipali, over to you.
So there is a lots of evidence data we are every day collecting, because when you're working at a grassroots, there is a number of incidents you are somewhere observing, and somewhere you are a part of that kind of the incident. So I'm here trying to put the two things. One is the violence survivor, those who are reaching out to us. Yeah, we can say those we are actually reaching out to them. तो वो उनके साथ का जो एक इंटरवेंशन है, वेर वी आर ऑलवेज सीइंग द व्हिच इंटरसेक्शनैलिटी इज समवेयर द कमिंग more strongly. There's the caste, mental health, education, there's the locations, then the class, these kind of the thing. तो वहां पे एक तरीके का जो एविडेंस डेटा बिल्ड हो रहा है, वी आर डिजाइनिंग आवर प्रोग्राम इन दैट अप्रोच, वैसे कि हमारे mental health lens is a very strongly, because we've seen that the most of the young women coming from the marginalized background, they somewhere having the mental health issues, because they continuously live with the violence and this kind of the community oppressed systems के अंदर वो इतने वक्त से रह रहे. So our program is not pushing them, is a creating evolving system कि जहाँ पे they are, it's a more creative way. तो वो space जो है we design that way कि आप, because most of times when seeing that's a funder, donors and the CSR people having their expectation, you need to reach out within a year this number of things. But we said we know who are our participants now, how much time they will be taking to reach out to that goal. So it means our program need to be look at the need of the participant, not a look need of that donors on that match that they're funding and their numbers. So वो एक जो है, we very much consciously putting on that thing, because we've seen there's a lots of the emotional damage having these survivors. Or first of all, we need to work on that. Then we work on their livelihood and their economic independence and that the social inclusion and things. But immediately that's the individual caring is important. So that's the thing. The other part is the employee part. In Abuja, there is a more than the 85% team is coming from the marginalized background. So we very much focus on when we are recruiting people, even into leadership, the language should be not a barrier to people. जिन्होंने 15 साल काम किया, 20 साल काम किया, जिनका ग्रासरूट एक काफी ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस है, they can narrate their experience, they can write report into their language. Just because the donors and that organization want kind of this language, we can't the people hold to them to not to go to that kind of the position. So how organization can support to them? even our recruitment, we designed the kind of the structure key people when coming to us for an interview, we're giving them to exposure visit also to make them comfort. And when we are asking recommendation, we are not going only the recommendation call, because we believe in that every individual, every organization has their own cultures, calls, their beliefs, and the base they are giving their recommendation. As an organization, what are recommendation? And for that, we giving this exposure visit where people explore their skills and their behavior with us. And on that base, we will decide, not to other people's recommendation. And the exposure is a very much mandatory process of our recruitment. Not to people recommendations is a mandatory process for us. We'll definitely note it that a data, what people saying, but that's not a ground to reject the people applications. So that's the kind of the thing is we are very much consciously. We also within our organization form a kind of the dialogue where we call the courageous conversation, because within our organization we have a privileged communities candidate also. So how we are mingling that things, because there is a somewhere, and it's a not a purposely they're doing, but that's a lots of anger within that community leaders, and that anger somewhere they're also sometimes excluding the privileged class communities candidate. So how it is impacting the human behavior and emotional well-being. So the for that also we're having the very much lots of conversations within our organization, because if we are saying one side ki the privileged community excluding us, and that's why we are experiencing these kind of the emotional trauma. The same thing is it we are doing when the people working with us from the privileged background, we just excluding them because there's generations oppress somebody's with us, and that's somewhere the reaction we're doing immediately those who are working with us. So these kind of the dialogue also we're having. So yeah, this is a system somewhere, and also we're having a dialogue with that privileged community, because we work with the communities also, what are co-creating. So when the donor coming to us, when the individual well-wishers coming to us, even the college students, the privileged class, the St. Xavier's, it's a big colleges when coming to us. So where is a power is a playing role, and how what's the power actually when you are accessing, when you're enjoying, but what's the destroying also. So these kind of the dialogue also be initiating. It's not only you are giving money, so your role is a end here. Your role is a start actually here to whom you are giving money. So your money is a need to the access that a power where we also want to part of that a power. So these kind of the best practices we're trying to somewhere very strategically to re-establish into the communities. So I'm again giving back to Soumya to you.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing, everybody. What really came out and what I really learned is how much how important it is to address power dynamics, and how addressing power dynamics can lead to best practices in bringing intersectionality when talking about something like gender justice. Also, Shruti, when you were talking about bringing women to the workforce, I remembered one banner. I don't know which companies it was, but they were encouraging women to join after motherhood gap, and it was very beautiful. It was like, who can get job done? Mothers. So that just came to me, and yeah, it reminded me of that. With that, I will just open the floor to the audience. You've been patiently listening to us for this long while. Also, would love to see some cameras on if you can. If not, that's also perfectly fine. So I would just hand it over to anybody who would like to ask the panelists any questions. Also, if the panelists would like to ask each other questions, that is also perfectly fine. So yeah, keeping the platform open for anybody who wants to talk about intersectionality in gender equality and gender justice. Yes, hi, Agrivan.
Hey, Soumya. Thank you. Hello, panelists. So my question is like, there are so many things which are in our control and which aren't in our control. So they are in both aspects. So given in that state that we are living upon, so I just want to understand on as an individual, how one can work in this forum to what to say, ensure that we strive towards to achieve that goal. So what is that one thing that an individual can do upon? So there are many, what is the intricacies like the policy, the what is a society and other stereotypes or themes attached to it. How an individual can work on these areas as an themselves to ensure that that theme is getting strengthened and that inspires others to move forward. So I just want to hear from you all.
I mean, I have a really quick answer to that. Maybe I can start. Thanks for asking that question. And I think a really simple answer to that is just by becoming an ally. And this becomes really crucial, especially for women in the workforce, to have allies from different genders. And allyship clearly means like there are two ways to break it down. One is like just being really self-aware about the biases, the social conditioning that's in all of us, and being very consciously aware of that. And of course, once you have the awareness towards building it. And secondly is to actually like what's the definition of allyship, which is like how do you lend your voice to someone who's marginalized. It can be a returning mother, it can be somebody who's just joined, maybe comes from a small town or whatever that looks like. So I would say an individual action that each one of us can do that I promise you will make some difference, if not in a big circle, at least a circle around you, is just being an ally.
Thanks a lot, Payushni. Any other questions from anyone here?
So I'm just trying to respond to Agrivin's questions. One things which I learned through my work and experience key, now is the time to take it that to risks. To if you really want to change the structural things, if you really want to change the ideology, it means you need to take as an individual to risk to that with yourself. Key, is it that the thing, if it is bothering me, then what's the solutions I need to work on it? Because many times we are always feel to live with the comforts, and that a comfort is a because it's a related to me. But if it is a, if you can try to listen to your inner voice and the inner thing, if there is a really in deeper level discomfort, so what's it that the discomfort and how can to work on that a discomfort? So the risk is a very much important right now. We need to take it and we think to beyond that a reality, because the world actually taught us this is a reality, but I feel this is not a reality. Definitely we can bend this reality, and that to bend this reality, it means we need to take a risk to bend that reality.
Can I just add one quick thing? Because I think it's such a great question, because you're kind of putting the onus on the individual and saying, what can I do? And I think that's such a great place to start. Just one thing that I've realized is that speaking truth to power is a muscle, and you have to keep doing it wherever you can, so that when the moment comes where you really have to speak up, you have the words, you have the courage, you know what you want to do. So I feel like just building on what Dipali said about taking those risks and figuring out those small instances where you can build that muscle is very important, because it's not going to ever be one critical moment in your life where you're going to stand up and intersectionality and all of that is going to play at once, right? It's always going to be small things. For instance, there's this one really kind gentleman who would take me for a meeting, and I was leading the meeting. I was supposed to lead the meeting, but the person in front kept talking to him. And this, 60-year-old man is like, hey, I don't know any of this. Can you talk to her? And that just shifted things. And I feel like it was so powerful. It was a small thing for him to do, but it meant so much for him. Just building, I think that speaks what Passion was saying about being an ally. And we're never going to know what a good ally is until we keep testing and trying. So just to leave that with you.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Deepali. In case we don't have any questions, we can also share our own thoughts on intersectionality and everything I think we talked about in the panel. If you have any thoughts of your own on that, what is your definition? It differs from everything that was shared in the panel, or some of the challenges you have seen while dealing with intersectionality and in solving complex issues. Would love to hear that as well.
Yeah, I just was very uh, aligned with the discussion around the policy, like how the policy are made. Is there in consultation with the women or the groups for which it is been made? For example, in one of the town hall, we were discussing about the period leaves. And I was wondering, we were all wondering, like, and I also did not realize that is it taking consideration of the most marginalized group of women, for example, the labor class or the people who are working in the field, women working in the field. So I was wondering, the policy is so like, I was happy, but at the same time, I really did not see how it is affecting the most marginalized group of women. For example, my own maid, like, am I aware? Am I concerned? Like, is she coming during her periods? Is he comfortable coming to my place during periods? So I was wondering, like, how these policies are made, and I mean, I was wondering, it's so good to have these policies for sure, but are we also looking into those lenses of intersection, like how it is affecting others? But at the same time, it's also important, like, like what we were talking right now, that कुछ लोगों को अभी अगर helpful हो रहा है, why not just advocate? Because once we speak and talk about it, then only maybe then we will realize and advocate for others. So I'm not sure what is the right and wrong about it, because I have been working with the children also with the same logic. For example, right to education for section 12(1)(c), the private school getting the children 25% reservation. So in Delhi, when I started, we looked for the like low hanging children groups or families who can get this policy benefited. And then year after year, we went for the children with disability. But that is the reality, like, like how we can go step by step. And unfortunately, this is the reality. But yeah, I don't know what if there is some other way to go about it. But yes, I think that these spaces are very important, and it's so glad we were able to hear from all four of you. Need more space to talk about it. Maybe this discussion will open up our own mindset and challenge our own spaces to look deeper into these aspects.
Thank you so much, Gayatri, for sharing that. In the interest of time, we will now just quickly take 5 minutes to introduce the members of the communities of practice to everyone. And I would love to hear from one or two people on how they're feeling about this new community. And with that, we can close the space. So I'll just share my screen, and please feel free to send a lot of reactions, claps, and hearts as I'm introducing the new COP members to everyone. much. While all of us COP members couldn't be here, you know us and you know our faces now, all of us that are here and ones that couldn't speak to this space. So please feel free to reach out to us as a community. We will continue creating these spaces. And what we were talking about, data-based evidence, that's also something that is a mandate of this community of practice, where whatever we are getting as insights from anecdotes and conversations, we also want to collect data and sort of like advocate for it with data-based evidence, so that it comes off with a lot of strength. And with that, thank you so much for joining the space today. Thank you to all the panelists, Payushni, Shruti, Deepali. Anupama unfortunately had to drop off. But thank you so much for joining us and for all of your insights, and to all the others attending for your participation and all your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Shruti. Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend,
All the
everyone.
best. Yeah. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening ahead. Bye-bye.